Hello, shalom, ahalan, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us this morning, or perhaps this afternoon, depending on where you are joining us from. My name is Emily Gilgoff, and I am the Director of Civil Society Affairs here at the Embassy of Israel to the United States in Washington, D.C. Thank you all so much for joining us today for this important conversation about women in diplomacy. We are so thrilled to be celebrating International Women's Day with our friends from the embassies of Bahrain, the UAE, Morocco, and the US State Department, along with all of our amazing audience members who we are extremely happy to have here today to celebrate. So with the signing of the Abraham Accords in 2020, we decided to take this opportunity to highlight women in this often male-dominated field of diplomacy and discuss the impact of these diplomatic ties in the area of gender. So it's a bit of a new conversation, and it's very exciting to talk about it today. So following our panel discussion, there will be a few moments for questions from the audience. So please feel free to use the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen throughout the panel portion to input any questions that you may have and that our panelists can answer towards the end. So without further ado, I am very excited and honored to be introducing His Excellency Gilad Erdan, the Ambassador of Israel to the United States and to the United Nations. He is the first person to serve in both roles since Abba Eban in the 1950s. Prior to assuming his dual role, Ambassador Erdan served in the Israeli Knesset for 17 years and held several ministerial positions, including Minister of Public Security, Minister of Strategic Affairs, and Minister of Environmental Protection. He was a member of Israel's Security Cabinet and led many important reforms in Israeli society. Please welcome Ambassador Gilad Erdan. Thank you.
Thank you, Emily, and welcome everyone. We appreciate you joining us on this special day. And of course, a warm welcome to my friend, Her Highness Princess Lalla Joumala, Ambassador of Morocco to the United States. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much, Your Excellency, for having me. Thank you so much.
Great. So International Women's Day is not just a day for celebrating, it's also a day for reflecting on the role women play in our societies. As we gather in this forum to discuss the topic of women in diplomacy, it is the perfect opportunity to highlight the essential part women must play in promoting peace and growing people-to-people interactions in our region. So much has changed since we marked this day a year ago. Our world looked very different. There were only a few hundred cases of COVID-19 in the US. Most of us had never heard of Zoom events, and the very idea of Israel, Morocco, the UAE, and Bahrain partnering on any type of event was a distant dream. But while the pandemic has had a devastating effect on all of us, and especially on women, the Abraham Accords and the new peace sweeping the region have done the exact opposite. The Accords have transformed the region in so many ways. They are the source for new cooperation in business, culture, and academia, and are a shining example of coexistence and religious tolerance. This new inspiring peace has also highlighted the essential role of women in both achieving peace and actualizing it. The involvement of women in forging these agreements and in building new partnerships between our governments and perhaps even more importantly, between our people is instrumental to their success. Of course, there is still much work to be done on that front, but I am proud to say that Israel and the other countries represented here today all share a commitment to achieving gender equality in all aspects of our society. We all recognize that a world with gender equality is not just a fairer world for some, it is also a better world for all. Equality and diversity allow us to build better friendships between our countries and to grow partnerships that guarantee a better future for our children. Gathered with us today are representatives of our new and old partners. Her Highness Princess Lalla Joumala, Ambassador of Morocco to the United States, Deputy Chief of Mission Shaima Gargash of the United Arab Emirates, Acting Deputy Chief of Mission Yousif Ahmed, and Trade Representative Rose Sager of Bahrain, Director for Press and Public Diplomacy, Bureau of Near Eastern Affairs of the US State Department, Lynn Roche, and of course, Israel's Minister of Public Diplomacy, our very own Tammy Ben Haim. I thank you all for being here. I look forward to hearing your insights and perspectives, and I hope this will be the first of many fruitful discussions between our countries. Together, I believe we can facilitate real change, not only in our region, but around the world as well. It is now my honor to introduce my colleague and friend, Her Highness Princess Lalla Joumala, Ambassador of Morocco to the United States. Lalla, it was a pleasure to meet you. I continue to be impressed by your leadership and know that together we will achieve incredible things for our countries. The floor, or should I say screen, is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador Erdan, for your very kind introduction, and particularly for your personal initiative to convene such a timely gathering, focusing on women's empowerment. It is a strong reminder that success on this issue depends on the support of all of society stakeholders, both male and female. Your Excellency, ladies and gentlemen, I'm indeed honored to join you for what is always a somewhat bittersweet occasion on our calendars. On the positive side, International Women's Day is an opportunity to celebrate the advances in women's rights. And thankfully, there are many. However, it also highlights the persistent challenges we continue to face around the world in achieving gender parity. This past year in particular, the effects of the devastating pandemics have further exacerbated the disparities amongst marginalized groups within all our societies, including women. Thankfully, 2020 also ended on a note of great hope, especially in our region, with the respective diplomatic breakthroughs between Bahrain, Sudan, the UAE, Morocco, and the State of Israel. But before I expand on this development, allow me a brief personal note. Your Excellency, ladies and gentlemen, today I'm addressing you as a Moroccan woman whose great honor it is to serve as ambassador of His Majesty King Mohammed VI of Morocco here in the United States. I'm indeed proud to represent a country where for decades, the advancement of the status of women has been a priority of His Majesty and his forefathers, and where the Constitution enshrines gender equality. For that reason, I do not see myself as a pioneer. In fact, I'm merely and humbly perpetuating the tradition of a very long line of trailblazing Moroccan women. Examples of strong female leaders abound, both in Morocco's past and present. From Fatima al-Fihri, who founded in 859 the first university in the world, Al-Qarawiyyin, to my late aunt, Her Royal Highness Princess Lalla Aisha, who became the first Arab woman to serve as ambassador representing Morocco in the United Kingdom in the 1960s. To the current example set by a countless number of women across all walks of life, women have always been and continue to be a force of positive change in Morocco. Your Excellency, ladies and gentlemen, let us be honest. Our region is not an easy one. And like everywhere in the world, women are often the biggest victims of conflict and instability. That is why female voices are so important and why women's commitment to peace is often deeply personal. While the role of women in peace building is key to any form of sustainable peace, the formal place that they're granted is too often minimal. For this reason, in the Middle East and elsewhere, you will see women find alternative and creative ways outside the official realms of power to exert influence. Our challenge then becomes to translate the leverage gained from this grassroots approach and ensure that it leads to the meaningful participation of women in decision-making processes. Let us take the specific example of Arab-Israeli relations, where the recent establishment of relations between Israel and Morocco and the signing of the Abraham Accords have ushered in a new era of peace and opportunity. As our countries seek to deepen their partnerships across all sectors, the contribution of women must be encouraged. For if the breakthroughs brought about by these agreements are to be long-lasting, they must be inclusive. From my country's perspective, women from both the public and private sectors are fully involved in the implementation of the US-Morocco-Israel trilateral agreement, exchanging regularly with their Israeli counterparts and building new avenues of partnership. And for the Moroccan women supporting this dynamic, it is not only about seizing political, social, and economic opportunities. It is also about honoring common history and shared identity by reconnecting with thousands of Israeli women of Moroccan heritage who share a language and so many cultural traditions. Through the eyes of these mothers, sisters, wives, or daughters, separated by geography, but brought together by vibrant cultural links, there is an exceptional human dimension that overrides politics. Nurturing that human dimension will be the key of the success of the Accords. In the end, our efforts to channel this positive dynamic of regional change into building more inclusive, fair, and open societies remain the surest path to greater peace and stability. These efforts will be the building blocks to a regional future defined by shared aspirations, where fear or ignorance of the other is replaced by the realization that all of us, men or women, Jews, Christians, or Muslims, seek the same basic human needs. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Video.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Her Highness Ambassador Lalla Joumala and Ambassador Gilad Erdan for your important remarks. Thank you so much. Now I would like to introduce our moderator, Lynn Roche, who is the Director for Press and Public Diplomacy within the Bureau of Near Eastern Affairs at the US State Department. Lynn is a member of the Senior Foreign Service and joined the U.S. Department of State's Bureau of Near Eastern Affairs as Director for Press and Public Diplomacy in August 2017. In addition to other Washington assignments, she served overseas in Cuba, Mexico, Peru, Mongolia, Hong Kong, and Georgia. Please welcome Lynn Roche.
Thanks, Emily. And I'd like to thank our host, the Israeli Embassy, for bringing us together today. The U.S. State Department is honored to be a part of this event as we support public diplomacy engagement that advances normalization and women's empowerment. I'd like to turn to introducing our panelists. Shaima Gargash is the Deputy Chief of Mission at the Embassy of the United Arab Emirates in Washington, appointed in early 2019. Prior to her current position, she led communications and public diplomacy and was a political analyst in the Congressional Affairs Division. Shaima has extensive experience in both the public and private sectors dealing with economic and socio-political issues, including research on women's political participation in the UAE. Yousif Ahmed is the acting Deputy Chief of Mission for the Embassy of the Kingdom of Bahrain in Washington, where he also manages the embassy's trade portfolio and regularly engages with the US private sector. Prior to joining the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Yousif spent a decade at Gulf International Bank, a leading merchant bank domiciled in Bahrain. Born and raised in Bahrain, Rose Sager immigrated to the US, where she received her degree from City University of New York. Her career has included positions in the financial and insurance industries and training director at a major US airline. Rose began as trade representative for the Kingdom of Bahrain in 2006 with the implementation of the US-Bahrain Free Trade Agreement. And she works to increase bilateral trade and establish major business and government contacts promoting the Kingdom of Bahrain. Tammy bin Haim has served as Minister for Public Diplomacy at the Embassy of Israel in Washington since August 2018. As a career diplomat for more than 15 years, she has served over 20 years in the civil service. At the ministry in Jerusalem, Tammy worked on both the Central and South Asia desks. She also served as DCM in Athens and as counselor for internal politics in New Delhi. Tammy's experience in media relations includes service with the Ministries of Environmental Protection and Finance, as well as the Finance Committee of the Knesset. So thank you all for being with us today. And I'd like to begin this conversation with a question about you as women diplomats. So Tammy, I'll turn to you. And she's surprised. What was key to your decision to pursue a diplomatic career?
Yeah, for me, it's actually the opposite, right? I'm a daughter of a diplomat. My father was a diplomat, so I had no choice but to enter the family business. Actually, as a woman, I must say, I tried to many other careers, including being, as you said, working in the Israeli parliament as an assistant and trying other things, and tried to delay entering or not entering actually diplomacy or the diplomatic world. Partly, I think, because I was aware of the hardships of the posts. Not, my family moved from place to place, and I knew very well, firsthand as the daughter of a diplomat, the difficulties of it. And you want sometimes, when you are geared to maybe look for a better life, a more family-oriented career. But at the end, I couldn't help it. And the fascination of the diplomatic life, the impact you can make, and the life that you lead, the new challenges and the new places and the new people overtook it. And, I went at a later stage in life than most cadets actually enter the ministry. I went into the foreign ministry, and I think I actually gained from it. Being a little older and working in other places and finding out who I am first, as a person, as a woman, I think actually made it easier for me to handle a lot of the difficulties and challenges that you do find in this diplomatic or almost nomadic life, I can say. And I have 2 daughters now, and I think that they will benefit, and their lives will be richer by being able to live in different countries and discover different cultures, and will hopefully be better when they get older to identify themselves and what they want from their own personal life and career life because of this.
Thank you, Tammy. And Shaima, what obstacles and challenges have you encountered as a woman in diplomacy?
I think it's not a challenge that only women in diplomacy face. I think it's a challenge that every woman faces, and not necessarily specific to one community or country to another. I think, realistically, we are in a male-dominated world. Most of the jobs and leadership are run by men. We have around 20 to 30% of our diplomats women in the foreign service in the UAE. And I think the challenges I face is more is related more about how I can have a stronger voice and a stronger say in decision making, how I can be taken seriously, keeping in mind most of our kind of directors and officials in the ministry are much older men, and so again, you are kind of conveying your opinion to someone who is as old as your father. And in a Middle East culture, sometimes that plays a factor in being taken seriously. But I think with how global the world has become and how cosmopolitan the UAE is, and kind of working in the foreign service, I think the benefit of kind of going beyond the obstacle is a lot of these people in the foreign service are quite open-minded. And so they do want to hear a lot of perspectives, especially now there's a lot of focus on youth in the Middle East, the role of women in diplomacy and peacemaking. And so I think obviously in any career, there is a bit of a challenge to begin with, just proving yourself, having a voice for yourself, and then gradually that kind of eases off.
Thank you, Shaima. Thanks. As mentioned earlier, COVID-19 has given us a rare opportunity to reach audiences across the United States and in the region for this important conversation. We are proud to report that Israel, the United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, and Morocco are all leading the charge in efforts to fully vaccinate their citizens. Thus far, Israel has administered over 8 million doses of the COVID vaccine. The United Arab Emirates has administered over 6 million doses. Bahrain has administered over 300,000 doses, and Morocco has administered close to 4 million doses of the vaccine thus far. I'll turn to you, Yousif, for the first question. How have women contributed to the fight against COVID-19?
Hi, Lynn. Thank you very much for that question. Well, I guess, first and foremost, women are actually leading the health response to the COVID vaccine. We know that women make up almost 70% of the healthcare workforce. I think that's something that's quite significant. In addition to that, we do know that the core work behind the vaccine research also came from a team of women. That's also something that I don't think any man can take claim for that. In conclusion, we do know that women have been leading the fight for not just the work, but for the groundbreaking work. So, I think that when it comes to facing discrimination and all other types of discrimination, let's say, in the work-life balance and everything else, that they've been able to not just face risks, but at the same time guarantee that a vaccine can be rolled out at a time when the world actually needed it.
Thank you, Yousif. And Rose, your thoughts on how women have contributed to the fight against COVID? Thanks.
Good morning. Thank you very much for having me. Women play an integral role, I think, in running and multitasking in everything they do. And specifically, when I speak about Bahrain, I think, and I'm proud to say, that we have so much women involvement. Besides being in healthcare, we have the Minister of Health is a woman. She has emphasized health education, proactive in prevention and treatments, offers an open door policy to the Ministry of Health for all citizens and residents in Bahrain. A task force for COVID-19 was created from early last year when this pandemic first began, and it is comprised of women and men equally. They researched, they looked into data, they brought in sterilization equipment. They looked into getting vaccines sourced to Bahrain for all citizens and nationals. I feel like women play an integral part because they are involved in the decision-making process. And I believe that's what's so important in getting them the rights and the equality that we're all striving for.
Thanks, Shaima. Thanks, Rose. And over to Shaima. So, Shaima, your thoughts on how maybe women have been uniquely affected by COVID-19?
I think there's women have obviously been more impacted than men have. Not only are they kind of caregivers and caretakers, they do have much more responsibility today than before. Majority of women today are in the work field. They also have to balance virtual learning for their kids. I myself have 3 kids here in DC, and I think it has been extremely difficult to kind of on the work-life balance. You do have that role of being a mom at home, balancing their school duties, but also being a housewife, but also being kind of an employee. I think more so for women than for men. I think there's always this kind of societal pressure, I guess, even at home, when you try to maybe take some time off just for 5 minutes to do something at home. You can't really do that because you still need to attend to your children, see what they need. Obviously, when it's at home, there's a lot of distractions, like going to the kitchen and you're like, wait, I have a Zoom call, or, this has been, I think this has been really difficult. And like Yousif has mentioned, majority of the nurses in hospitals and care homes are women. They are taking care of other people, making sure that I think because also as women, we're much more invested in kind of the community as well. And so we also want to be part of helping others as well. And that's, I think, something kind of a natural thing in women, I guess.
Thank you, Shaima. And Tammy, do you have anything to add on that about how women are uniquely affected by COVID?
Yeah, I'll definitely follow what Shaima said and strengthen that. She's absolutely right. And in Israel, and I'm assuming in the other countries in our region, but worldwide, there are more women workers in the healthcare complementary fields. Assistants in nursing and nursing homes. Most of the educators, if we look at the whole education system from kindergarten and elementary school to university, it's mostly women who are there. In other assistance sort of jobs, it's mostly women. And we all know a few things. One, these people who work in these jobs are much more susceptible to getting COVID. And we said most of these people are women. So they're in a higher risk jobs and areas. There are also 2 other things. They're also in this type of job that you can't do it from home. You have to physically do it. And thirdly, especially also in Israel, but we've seen it in the US and in Europe and in other places, these are the jobs where people were either laid off or put on long-term leave. So women here are triply more affected. They're losing their income. They're more susceptible to COVID now, thank God. And you mentioned it, Lynn, and in Israel and in Bahrain and in the UAE and in Morocco, many people are getting vaccinated, but this has just been in the last 1 or 2 months and not in the past year that we didn't have the vaccine and they had to keep working. And I think exactly like Shaima said, if these women, if they are laid off and they go now to the home, they have a lot of work to do in home, what we call, unpaid or uncalculated home workload, right? Which anyway, women do. And this is one of the things we have to strive for. But across the world, women still do more of the home workload than their male counterparts. So now, whether she's able to transfer part of work to home or not, she's doing all of it. She's a teacher and a cleaner. And does the laundry and the grocery. And again, even these jobs that she does, going to the market these days, again, she's more susceptible to getting COVID. And on a personal note, Shaima, ever since my daughters were young, every time I'm on the phone, they totally disregard the phone. They remember the most important things to tell me when I'm on the phone. And this transferred seamlessly to Zoom, whether I'm on a webinar or speaking, to the ambassador. They don't care. They need to talk to me right there. So if I don't have the cat meowing in the background, I have my daughters coming or complaining or telling me stories in the middle of Zoom. So
exactly the same. Exactly the same.
Right?
I had a call this morning at 8 o'clock, and my child and my colleague's child were like nagging and crying in the background. So yes, it doesn't end.
So it's it's a small and a fun, fun in a ways. It's not sometimes fun when it happens, but I'm saying even these small things, even when we have jobs a lot of our jobs can be done via Zoom and via email and from home, we still have the fact that, if you're home, you're working for us, and I don't care what, what anybody else says.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone. It's clear that women's inclusion in the peace building process is essential to its long-term success. And so turning to you, Rose, within this framework, how would you envision further incorporating women in these efforts? How can we bring women to the forefront of the peace building efforts?
I feel that in general, women are the anchors of the family unit. And as such, they become anchors of the countries they serve. I feel that the roles that we play as women, whether it's in education, health, finance, fashion, all contribute to the success and advancement of our countries, the countries we represent as a whole. If we, again, I'm going to repeat, but if women are given the right to be decision makers, I feel that we can play an integral part in advancing our goals. And I hate to say it, but we all have this preconceived notions that women are just nurturers and caretakers and multitaskers. It is true. So I'm going to give credit where credit is due. I think women can actually do so and multitask, and because they have the empathy and the caring, I feel that they can make and play a big part in the advancement of peace.
Thank you. And so Yousif, turning to you, your thoughts on how women can contribute more to peace building in the region. Thanks.
Yes, thank you. Well, just to give you, I would say a good example, and it might necessarily be considered to be peace building, but when you look at women's leadership in response to the pandemic, I would like to bring up the example of the New Zealand's Prime Minister. I think she's a prime example of leadership, and if you have the ability to not just defend your country from any kind of outside aggression, but to actually do so with COVID, I think that you're quite a successful peace builder right there. So sometimes we face all types of threats, and we have a prime example basically of how women can take a leadership role. And as my colleague Rose mentioned, it's not just the empathy. I think it's the ability to juggle work-life balance and just have the ability to most likely do some kind of problem solving that maybe men aren't accustomed to. And I think when women are able to adopt that, the success rate is quite high.
Thank you, Yousif. I'd like to turn to sort of looking at normalization in the region, the Arab-Israeli normalization. And, it has led to a number of agreements already in areas such as medicine, science, technology, economics, culture, and tourism. And these agreements are promoting people-to-people interactions and fostering dialogue to advance tolerance and understanding. Maybe turning back to you first, Yousif, tell us about how women in your countries are leading in these fields and can benefit from these exchanges or agreements. Thanks.
Yeah, so within the Kingdom of Bahrain, we have something called the Supreme Council for Women. This is an organization that's chaired by Her Royal Highness Princess Sabiha Al Khalifa. She is the wife of His Majesty King Hamad, and she has been diligently empowering Bahraini women for the last 2 decades. This institution was created about 20 years ago. And what they've been doing is that they've been looking at new legislation and policies that would not just protect women, but advance their interests in numerous ways, whether if it's through education or protection when it comes to the family law, or creating something called an alimony fund. What they try to do is just to make sure that women reach an equal status in society. In fact, this is something that's enshrined in Bahrain's constitution. Specifically, the constitution guarantees the equality of women and men in political, social, cultural, and economic life. So what we're trying to do in terms, just to alleviate the challenges that women face, is to make sure that there is legislation put in place that not just protects women, but also finds a way to improve the advancement in general. Bahrain, I believe, was the first country in the Arabian Gulf to make sure that there is education for women. I think that took place maybe in 1928. And what we've been trying to do is to just build up on all of that. So, in addition to not just alleviating the challenges that face women, but we've created specific areas of studies. We've created things called equal opportunity units that spans across both the private and public sector. So what Bahrain has done is that we haven't just tried to look at the quantity of women, let's say, who are employed in the workforce, but to make sure that they're sitting in boardrooms, they're making the major decisions for any of the organizations that they're in.
Thank you, Yousif. And Tammy, do you have any thoughts on that about women in your countries who are leading in these fields and can benefit from the exchanges or agreements that normalization provides?
Definitely. First, I think Yousif is very right. There are many things that women can do, but one of the first steps that needs to be done, and at this moment in my government and in other governments in the world, it's mostly it's a majority of men who are in the ministerial positions and are in the government, and they must be aware of this. So we're educating both the women themselves to empower themselves and work, but also the boys and later the men who are in these positions and need to be aware and need to put rules and laws in place in order to allow women to fulfill what their right place within society. And I'll just say, for example, the Israeli government, when even a year ago when Corona started and people, as I said, were laid off or put to long-term leave, many of these people who were laid off, not only were they women, they were pregnant women. And in Israel, there are laws anyway that you cannot change the status of a woman who's working with you, during pregnancy and for the while after, while she's on maternity leave, because this, of course, is discriminatory towards women who are the only ones who can bear children. So when they noticed that this was happening under Corona, they immediately went, and for those who they couldn't, somebody, if the place closes down, the woman, of course, cannot go to work if there's no workplace for her to work at. But the government made immediate provisions to provide these women, salaries or monthly stipends in order for the full term of whatever pregnancy and then the maternity leave, in order so they won't be worse hurt than the colleagues who were doing the same work. So you have to be really aware of it. And on a more international level, there've been studies after studies that show that if you involve NGOs, if you involve civil societies, if you involve women in the negotiation process, in the peacemaking process, the peacekeeping, the normalization has a much better chance. Some even say 64% more chance of succeeding and being a long-term, lasting long-term. So definitely what we're, in our region and our normalization, I think we're already seeing the benefits to women. We had an agreement signed with the UAE on COVID research. And as Yousif said and others, a lot of this research is led by women, or women are taking part of it. So that's already a benefit of women. We have a few economic agreements signed. And in Israel, we've been trying for years to promote women in STEM, in science and technology and engineering and math. We're doing a better job at it. 60% of Israel's university students are female, which is a huge success. Sadly, only 35% of our engineering students are women, so we still need to work there. But at least it's up to 35%. It was less. So I think if we can work together, and definitely in the fields of research, of academia, the head of our higher education council is Professor Zilberstadt, who is female. So I think already there we see some exchanges and exchanges and dialogue. I think if we move even in those two fields, we are setting up all our countries for future success and having more women in these, life-making roles, from university and then, to decision-making processes. So it seems that things are going in the right direction, in the right fields, but we have to be aware of it, I think, not just today, but obviously today, but in every single day and in every single part of the decision-making process.
Thank you, Tammy. And so one more question for first Shaima and then Rose, dealing specifically with the normalization. And I think we're beginning to see your questions come up on the chat. So thank you very much for those. And I'll kind of incorporate a little bit of one of them into this question. So for Shaima and then Rose, with economic opportunities on the horizon, are there efforts to actively incorporate women in the business of trade and also to address entrepreneurship for women within the normalization of Arab-Israeli relations? Thanks.
Thank you. So not only are we emphasizing our our relations with Israel on not in business, but we have signed agreements and collaborate in a number of sectors, from academia, STEM, COVID, trade is a big thing. There's film and culture. So on the business side, there's definitely there'll be more and more kind of business delegations to and from the UAE and Israel. Obviously, there is a big push for more women to be in kind of in the private sector. There are more more and more policies coming out in the UAE that are enforcing kind of equitable policies, in terms of equal pay in the private sector between men and women. There are certain fields, for instance, that Israel is advanced in terms of in farming, for instance, something that we are all kind of invested in. Food security is a big thing. STEM. We have been a big supporter of female entrepreneurs, not just in the UAE in the region, but also with the United States through the WEF initiative, the WEFI. And we have been a big advocate for women empowerment in the private sector. We have around, I think 10% of our businesswomen are female, or entrepreneurs are female, but they also contribute billions of dirhams into our GDP. And so even though they're a small percentage of entrepreneurs in the private sector, they do have a larger kind of piece of the pie. They contribute to a bigger piece of the pie in the economy. By opening up and normalizing, obviously, you're expanding the network of an entrepreneur. With kind of more virtual settings, they can do business from home and kind of expand their business by just through an Instagram post or something. And there's a lot for it, especially as Tammy mentioned, most of the people who are kind of laid off or furloughed were women. But women have always been resilient and kind of take opportunity of what is happening. And obviously there's always lessons learned, and we look through how other countries have done so, and this is how we'll take forward this normalization, is expand beyond kind of, we focus on the people to people and common values, and move forward for the next generation.
Thanks, Shaima. And Rose, talking about women in trade and women's entrepreneurship, looking at this sort of new dynamic in the region. Thanks.
Actually, for Bahrain, it's not even a new dynamic with the world trade, but specifically with Israel, we've already had a visitor from Israel regarding tourism. She has met with the Bahrain Businesswomen Association, and they've already planned trade missions, cultural missions, and there are women-owned businesses who are starting to export handmade goods made in Bahrain in honor of the Abraham Accords, and donating part of the profits to charitable organizations, which is creating more jobs locally. So we have already seen country to country and women to women entrepreneurships. 49% of the women of businesses, one person owned businesses in Bahrain, is run by women, owned by women. So we are very proud of that statistic. We have the head of small and medium enterprises. We have an association that's headed by a male. However, in the Ministry of Industry and Commerce, it's headed by a female. We have a huge number of decision makers in the ministry, assisting and looking into the women's needs when they're entrepreneurs and running their own business. Women, like you all said, we all face challenges in running households and personal lives because we have more than one role, obviously. So the fact that a lot of women are involved in these decision-making helps, and the shared opinions between the Israeli, UAE, the Gulf countries, the businesswomen's ideas, we're exchanging ideas and helping one another. And I'm proud to say it has already begun with Bahrain.
Thanks, Rose. Thank you so much. And thank you to those of you who are participating and sending in questions. We'll try to combine a couple of questions. Again, we have about 5 minutes left before we'll need to sort of wrap things up. And so, Tammy, why don't we start with you on this question? It has to do with the conversation about the workplace and pressure on working women to be strong and stay positive throughout the pandemic in order to balance work and home life. You've talked about this a little bit. That's now sometimes being talked about as toxic positivity. That's also taking a toll on women's mental health. And so, thinking about Israel and Bahrain and the Emirates, are there ways that we can, maybe support each other, address women's mental well-being during these challenging times as also? And then to kind of maybe wrap into that a little bit, concerns about women who are in rural or remote areas and how, COVID affects them perhaps in more isolated situations. Over to you, Tammy.
Yeah, it's a big question, and I think a very correct question. I'll just say in general, I know the numbers in Israel, but from what I read and I see and I hear, it's like this all over the world. When people are polled about suffering from stress and depression, the percentage of women who answer that they are suffering from stress and depression is much higher than that of men suffering from the same thing. And I think I won't repeat everything, but definitely a lot of it is the issues we mentioned, the work-life balance, workplace, losing your job, having to take care of your immediate nuclear family and the extended family at times. But I don't want to say a positive thing, but what we do also see is that more women are turning to NGOs and to, government-run helplines in this matter. And again, a lot more women approach these helplines than men do, but they, again, the government or the different NGOs realized what they needed to do and are available, and resources now are available to these women who realize they need help balancing. And I think women are always told to, like, right, stiff upper lip, smile and bear it. You have a job, you should be happy. You have children, you should be happy. And I think it's the same that women always face and feel, but it's more extreme during this extreme time. So I can definitely see it. And well, this is a whole different conversation. Can women have it all, and how can you balance? But I think the fact that in Israel they're realizing that we need to offer women more assistance and see what they need and modify what we give the same way. The fact that it's a worldwide pandemic, it's not specific to one country or one continent or one region. And if we do speak about it and speak about it openly, we will be able and cooperate regionally, definitely, being physically close and geographically close. So many things are the same for us. So it's easier to talk to people who live in an area and know the area that you live in. And I think this would be a great place, not out of desperation or sadness, but how can we take what we found and the strength? Let's look at the strength we found this year and work together to promote women, in a regional cooperation, in a regional manner. If I suffer and you suffer and I find a way to get out of it and you found a different way, let's see how we can pool our strengths together, the lessons we learn together, and work together. So I really do believe that it offers a unique chance out of same geography, same issues, same challenges this year. So it offers us a great opportunity for working together.
Thank you, Tammy. And so we have time for one more question, and we'll kind of go around the horn with kind of brief answers on that. Looking at how can our countries work together to support women and promote equality? And there were some questions also, other questions from the audience that included, that bridge building, how can we use, say, cultural exchange or other kinds of diplomacy to enhance the future of women in the region? So maybe we'll give the women a chance to think about that, and we'll start with Yousif.
Thanks, Lynn. Well, one way I think that might be helpful when it comes to bringing in all of the other countries right now is to make sure that we have working groups. I think a good example is the Gulf Israel Women's Forum. If I'm not mistaken, this is a group that's maybe predominantly set up between the United Arab Emirates and Israel. But I think what that does is that it doesn't just promote a equitable prosperity, but at the same time, I think it's one of the first steps to normalization. At the end of the day, sometimes people would refer to the Abraham Accords as a peace deal. To me, it wasn't necessarily a peace deal. We weren't necessarily at war for us to sit and talk about peace. So the first step is, I think, instead of saying peace, it's more about normalization. And once you get into the normalization, you can bring up specific areas of cooperation. And I think that when we look at prosperity, that is something that everyone sees eye to eye. And so just to give you that one particular example, I thought that it was great that you had something called the Gulf Israel Women's Forum. It doesn't necessarily constrict one particular country. It does involve the Gulf. So I think that's something that we can look at and support women in the business arena, at least.
Thank you, Yousif. And Shaima, over to you.
So in terms of kind of promoting peace and kind of women equality and how we can benefit, I mean, this actual virtual forum is a wonderful example of this connectivity between us, is kind of speaking to each other and talking about issues that are of concern to us. We do we do want to have more of these dialogues and platforms. But also, I think all of us are come from a very kind of, rough neighborhood, I can say. And so I think our kids' generation have grew up in a totally different time than what we have, and compared to our parents and grandparents. And I think with the newer generation, they don't understand what the issue of conflict was, right? They're looking towards a more positive future, and we're here to set that future for them. And I think the youth have played an important role in triggering and projecting kind of positive progress for countries in the region, right? We want to ensure that we are using the right diplomatic tools to talk about things, and that, obviously not every single country will see eye to eye, but we do, communicate together and base our relationship based on common values and understanding, and take that forward. And I think having this platform on International Women's Day means so much, because this also, this is something that our children and my daughters can look up to, moving forward, that we have had this chance to patch things up. This is such a historical moment in our region, and for peacemaking, and no other way to, have this, promote this peace, without the role of women. We tap into such a diverse, a certain part in society that, we communicate much better than, compared to our male counterparts. And so to Yousif, like, I'm not dissing the men here, they play a crucial role, but I think we do have a different level of understanding at the different levels, and we bring this to the table. And I think moving forward, we definitely do want to have more of these engagements together, cross-cultural engagements, delegations, business, and gradually, I think through positivity and economic progress, there'll be more peace, there'll be more stability, and there'll be much more understanding. And I think this is very important. We didn't have this platform to communicate and understand each other, and this is why there was a lot of kind of I think issues that rose up. And I think I'm very positive moving forward, and I'm thankful to be part of this panel.
Thanks, Shaima. And Rose, over to you for any thoughts.
In my case, growing up female, Jewish, in a Muslim country, attending Catholic and government schools, I feel like I'm the model of diversity and inclusion. I truly and truthfully did not experience any obstacles growing up. I feel like the path to peace was paved a long time ago, has always been the case in Bahrain. We're very fortunate in looking at it as a very open country. The King Hamid Kingdom of Bahrain Declaration, which promotes peaceful coexistence and freedom of religion, is just a normal path to peace. I feel that we have paved the way, and certainly my personal experience has been all positive, and women's role have played in it, because we never found any exclusions. We were all given the opportunity to do what we wish and aspire to. And because I feel Bahrain was very forward thinking for as long as I can remember, and education being compulsory for women in the early 1920s, as Mr. Yousif had said, this is all contributing to having knowledge, education, which gives us power, and eventually the path to peace just comes natural. I know I always say Bahrain never ceases to amaze me, but it does, because it's always forward thinking, and it has contributed greatly. And women being a big part of it and never being discriminated against in decision-making has helped.
Thank you very much, Rose. And I know I knew Tammy before, but it's been really great to meet you, Shaima, Rose, and Yousif, and be part of this panel. So over to Emily. Thank you.
Hi, yes, thank you so much. We're just about ready to wrap up. So I just wanted to come on here and say thank you to all of our amazing panelists, also to the ambassadors of Morocco and of Israel, along with our amazing moderator, Lynn Roche. So thank you so much. This was absolutely lovely. It was great to have this conversation on International Women's Day. We want to thank everyone for joining us to celebrate. And we hope to see you again soon. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very, very much.
Thanks, everyone.
Stay
Thank
safe
you all. Thank you so much.
and
Have a
healthy.
great day.
Thank you. Happy International Women's